Before a leader can guide others, they must first learn to lead the one person who is often the hardest to control, themselves. Why Leaders Must Master Themselves First is not merely a book about leadership, it is a meditation on self-awareness, inner balance, and the quiet strength that emerges when one conquers their own chaos. True leadership, it reminds us, does not begin with a title, a strategy, or a crowd. It begins in silence, in self-reflection, in the heart of one's own inner landscape. At the center of the book lies a timeless truth: you cannot lead others toward peace if your own mind is a battlefield. The author paints this truth through vivid stories, of a young executive chasing approval but losing sleep, of a teacher struggling to inspire students while doubting their own worth, of a parent trying to guide their child while wrestling with unhealed wounds. Each story serves as a mirror, reflecting how easily our leadership falters when it is not anchored in inner mastery. To master oneself, the author explains, is to learn the art of awareness. It means standing still long enough to hear your own thoughts, to face your fears without running, and to choose calmness even when the world provokes chaos. A leader who has mastered themselves does not react, they respond. They are not driven by ego, anger, or insecurity, but by clarity and purpose. They understand that emotions are not enemies but messengers, and that learning to listen to them without being ruled by them is one of the first steps toward true power. The book emphasizes beautiful honesty. Many leaders hide behind their roles, pretending to have it all figured out. But great leadership is not about perfection, it's about presence. The leader who can admit, "I was wrong," or "I don't know yet, but I'll learn," becomes magnetic in their authenticity. Such humility, the author writes, is not weakness but wisdom, the kind that earns trust without demanding it. One of the most powerful chapters explores the difference between control and influence. Those who do not master themselves often seek control, over people, over outcomes, over everything uncertain. But those who have found inner mastery understand that influence arises not from control, but from example. When your words and actions are aligned, when your values guide your choices even under pressure, others begin to follow not because they have to, but because they want to. That is leadership born of integrity. The author uses a compelling metaphor of the ocean. Most people live like waves, tossed around by winds of circumstance, reacting to every storm. But the leader who has mastered themselves is like the ocean's depth, calm, grounded, and unmoved by surface turbulence. Such a person can walk into chaos and bring peace. They can face failure and remain centered. They can celebrate success without losing humility. Because their power does not depend on external approval, it comes from within. Through emotional storytelling, the book explores how many of us confuse leadership with performance. We act like actors on a stage, performing confidence while hiding exhaustion. But real leadership is not a performance, it is a practice. It grows in the quiet hours, in the moments of solitude when no one is watching. The author shares an example of a CEO who started every morning not by checking emails but by sitting in silence, reflecting on one question: what kind of energy do I want to bring into the world today? That small act of mindfulness transformed her leadership, making her less reactive, more compassionate, and more effective. Another lesson the book offers is about emotional regulation, the ability to stay composed under pressure. The author reminds us that leadership often unfolds in moments of tension: a difficult conversation, a crisis, a decision that might change everything. In those moments, the unmastered leader reacts impulsively, driven by fear or pride. The mastered leader, however, takes a breath. They pause. They look beyond emotion into intention. That pause, though brief, is the mark of mastery, the space between stimulus and response where wisdom resides. The book also dives into the shadow side of leadership, the ego. It explains that every leader faces the temptation to see themselves as the center of the story, to crave recognition, or to cling to power. But the moment leadership becomes about the self, it begins to decay. True self-mastery means taming the ego, remembering that leadership is service. The best leaders are not those who stand above others, but those who lift others higher. They measure their success not by the spotlight they occupy, but by the light they help others discover in themselves. There is also a profound discussion on the balance between strength and vulnerability. Many think that mastering oneself means being unshakable, unemotional, or detached. The author challenges this notion, arguing that real mastery includes vulnerability, the courage to feel deeply, to admit pain, to stay open even after being hurt. Because only those who are open can truly connect, and connection is the heartbeat of leadership. In one deeply moving section, the author describes meeting a monk who said, "If you want to change the world, sit quietly and heal your heart." At first, it seemed simplistic, even naive. But later, the author realized that most of the world's problems begin from unhealed hearts, from anger, greed, insecurity, and fear. Leaders who master themselves heal the world by healing the energy they bring into it. They stop reacting to pain by spreading more pain. They respond with understanding, and that simple shift changes everything. The journey toward self-mastery, the book explains, is lifelong. There is no finish line, only deeper layers to uncover. Every challenge, every conflict, every setback becomes a mirror showing what still needs to be refined. The mastered leader welcomes discomfort because they understand it as a teacher. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" That mindset transforms suffering into wisdom and mistakes into growth. One memorable story in the book is about a leader who lost everything: his business, his reputation, his confidence. At first, he blamed others and sank into bitterness. But over time, he began to see that the true battle had always been within. He had built his success on external validation, not inner alignment. When he began to rebuild himself, starting with honesty, discipline, and compassion, he discovered a peace he had never known before. His comeback was not just professional, it was spiritual. By the end of the book, the message becomes crystal clear. Leadership is not about how many people follow you, it's about how deeply you know yourself. The world does not need more powerful leaders, it needs more conscious ones. Leaders who are awake to their emotions, accountable for their actions, and anchored in their values. Leaders who bring light instead of noise. The author leaves us with a gentle challenge: to pause, to breathe, and to turn inward. Because every time we choose reflection over reaction, compassion over control, and authenticity over image, we take another step toward mastery. And as we do, our influence naturally deepens. People begin to trust not just our words, but our presence. They feel safer, stronger, and more inspired simply because we have done the inner work they long to do themselves. In the end, why leaders must master themselves first is a call to slow down, to listen, to lead not from the mind alone but from the heart. It reminds us that the most powerful leadership begins with a whisper, the quiet realization that before we can guide the world, we must first guide the soul that lives within us.